When we left off our animation previously, we had assembled our character. We had learned some information about layers and how to control them and how to make the layers work together to create a smoother, more complex animation. So we're going to take the character we had already created and we're going to do some animation with this character. Now, my goal for this tutorial is to take my character, have him nod his head, then he's going to walk across the room and then wave his arm goodbye. So in order for us to make this work, we're going to learn about keyframes and our timeline. Now again, if you have done any animation before, you're going to know that keyframes pinpoint the location and various properties of an object at a specific time along our timeline. We talked previously about waypoints, and waypoints are setting a specific value for a layer at a certain point in time, whereas a keyframe sets all of the waypoints and all of the values and all of the position for the entire object at that point in time. So keyframes are certainly more powerful than waypoints, and we'll highlight that as we go. So again, a few things we need to be sure that we understand here. This spot tells you what frame you're actually on. This is your timeline. The actual frame number is in the gray area. And there is a blue line above that. Now be careful, because this tricked me at the beginning when I was learning this application. These are not the same thing. Clicking on the gray timeline and clicking on the blue line do very different things. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is set our animation to be 300 frames long. So by default, it's certainly shorter than that. So I'm going to go to my canvas and choose my properties. And I'm going to set my time. Normally it defaults to image, but I'm clicking on the time tab. And I'm going to set my animation to be 300 frames long. And I'm going to apply that and click OK. So now down on my timeline, you can see that I have 300 frames. Now if you want to zoom in or zoom out on your timeline, you have zoom in on timeline and zoom out on timeline. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. There we go. So what I want to do now is first off control specific layers of my character. So I'm going to start with just the head. So I'm going to click on the head and I'm going to move forward in my timeline. So notice I'm dragging on the gray area. So I can drag that to whatever frame I want, and I want to go to frame 10. Now I can also, if you hold down your control key and hit your right or left pointy brackets on your keyboard, you'll see that you can control one frame at a time. So that's kind of a handy tool if you want to set your advancement in your timeline to a very small increment. So I'm going to go to frame 10. Actually, I'm going to put this back. No, I'll leave that on the head. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a keyframe. So that keyframe is set for my head. And what I want to do is nod my head a little bit to the side, and you'll see my keyframe appear. So I'm going to now move my timeline ahead a little bit, another 10 frames. I'm going to right click and add a keyframe. And I'm going to bring the head back. And I'll do this a couple of times for practice. Right click on the blue area, add keyframe, rotate the head, move my timeline ahead on the gray area, and then right click on the blue area, add another keyframe, and I'll set the head back to its normal position. All right, so at this point in time now, I'm going to move further ahead. I'll give it a few seconds there, and I'm going to click on my boy, and I'm going to add a keyframe for the boy. So the boy is now locked into that position. So what that means is from the beginning to here, the boy is not going to move. So I'm going to move ahead a little bit more, and I'm going to right click and add another keyframe. And now I'm going to move my character all the way over here. Okay, now I have now set another keyframe for the boy. Now notice the boy keyframes are not at the same elevation as the head keyframes because I'm on separate layers. So what I've just done here, though, if I review this quickly, head shakes, and then boy moves very quickly. So I have made the character move all the way across the screen in a matter of a few frames. I don't like that. I made it go way too fast. So I'm going to simply click and drag this keyframe all the way over here. So I've set the keyframe, but now I want to change its position. So you can do that with any keyframe at any time. Simply click and drag. So now if I watch my animation, my character nods his head, and then he should move more slowly across the screen. All right, so I'm happy with that. Now, before I go any further here, what I want to do is have you quickly refresh the preview option. As I mentioned in the very first tutorial, or the first animation tutorial, I believe, with the maze, SYNFIG doesn't do a great job of previewing your animation right here when you're in live edit mode. It tends to skip frames and be choppy. Now, you're probably seeing it even worse than I would be because I'm recording this. But if I want to see a true preview of my animation, I'm going to go up to my preview dialog box. And I'm going to set my quality to 1. And I'm going to crank up my frames per second to about 30 to give us a nice, smooth animation. And then I will preview that. Okay, so far so good. I'm happy with what's going on here. So back to our animation. Now what I want to do is have him wave goodbye before the animation ends. So I'm going to move my timeline. Again, make sure you're on the gray to control your timeline. So that's where my character stopped. So I'm going to go forward. And I want him to stand here for a couple of seconds. So on my boy, I'm going to add another keyframe. And then I'm going to move forward. Now that keyframe locks him in position. So now I'm going to go forward and I'm going to add for the right hand, and that's from my perspective, I'm going to add another keyframe. And I'm going to have the arm come up like he's waving. And I'm going to go ahead another few frames. Right click on the blue line, add another keyframe, and have the arm come back down a little bit. And I'm going to do a few more of these. So move on your timeline on gray, right click on blue, add keyframe. I'm going to continue this just to make him wave goodbye. And this time he's going to bring his arm all the way down. So move on my timeline, right click, add a keyframe. Arm comes all the way down. All right, now I got some time left, so I'm going to have him just move back towards the fireplace. So I'm now going to go to my boy. I'm going to add another keyframe just to make sure he stands there for a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead, move up, add keyframe, and then move my boy back to the fireplace. There we go. All right, so then I'll have maybe a second or so at the end where he's doing nothing. So I'm going to quickly preview this one more time. Preview options are set as to what they were. Click preview and play. Nod of head. Character moves. Hello. And he moves back. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So for practice, what I would like you to do is take the character that you created the other day, and you obviously will have a different background than I have, and do something very similar to what I did. Just move your character around the screen, and in this animation I had the boy group move by adding keyframes to that layer. I had the head move by adding keyframes to that layer. And I also had the arm wave, and I added keyframes to that layer. So I've animated 3 different layers within the same 300 frames, sorry. Okay, so there's step 2 in our animation. Our first animation was simply having the ball move through the maze. Now we've created a more complex character, and we have that character moving around the screen, and we've added keyframes for there. Now, if you want to remove a keyframe, let me just show you this before we leave. If you right-click, you can remove a keyframe. And if you want to remove keyframes from an entire layer, for example, if I go to the boy, you click on the layer. If you come over to transformation and you right click and you choose disconnect, that will remove all of the keyframes for that layer at once. So if you do make a mistake, you can remove one at a time. And if you want to get rid of all of them, you can choose transformation and disconnect that entire layer and start over. All right, so I'm finished with my animation. I'm going to stop at this point. I would like you to try what I've suggested, moving at least 3 different layers. In this case, I moved the boy, I moved the arm, and I moved the head. And when you're finished, make sure you save your animation. So I will right now save as and call this not boy build, but boy animate. Save that back to my desktop and save. All right, good luck with that. I'll see you again in a few days with some more tips.